Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Andrew Jorgensen, and I am the General Director of Opera Theater of St. Louis. On such a beautiful summer evening, I would so much rather be in person with all of you in Opera Theater's beautiful festival gardens, but I am delighted that we can be online together this evening. We are living through unprecedented times as we continue to navigate through the pandemic, the cancellation of our season, and a time of so much anxiety and uncertainty. I'm so grateful to all of you for joining us on our digital festival journey, and I am deeply grateful to our wonderful board of directors and to our board chairman, Noemi Neidorf, for helping to lead us through this challenging time. I am also grateful to Opera Theater's many donors. I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors who very generously supported the world premiere of Awakenings. After the cancellation of the season, each of these generous contributors allowed us to allocate their gifts to make possible the payments to our 2020 artists and artisans. I hope you will join me in thanking our leadership donors, the Fred M. Tsai Endowment at Opera Theater, and the Sally S. Levy Family Fund for New Works, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, and major production sponsor, Emily Rao Pulitzer. Thank you also to the donors who have made this new online spotlight series possible, PNC Arts Alive, and Steve Trampy and Jenny Gupta. Tonight we will enjoy conversation and music for approximately an hour, and then we'll spend a few minutes fielding questions from all of you. I hope you will feel free to type your questions and comments into the chat bar below your screen throughout the evening. If you're having trouble seeing the chat bar, hit the escape key to get out of full screen mode. One of the most fun parts of this kind of format is that we can be in conversation during the event. So please comment and ask questions early and often. Of course, we are relying on technology tonight, and technology doesn't always cooperate just the way we would want. If you have any problems, try hitting the refresh button on your browser, which often solves many issues. I am very excited to jump into our panel conversation tonight because tonight we are talking about a world premiere. And while we didn't get to see it on stage tonight, the world premiere of Awakenings will come to Opera Theater. So while we certainly feel the sadness that this season had to be canceled, tonight is also a preview of exciting things to come. So let's get started. I'm first pleased to introduce the director of this production, who is also the artistic director of Opera Theater since 2009. He has brought thrilling productions to Opera Theater's stage, including Nixon in China, The Death of Klinghoffer, Street Scene, Miss Havisham's Fire, Champion, Regina, and Fire, Shut Up in My Bones, just to name a few. Directing frequently at major opera houses in the US and abroad, one of his most recent successes was bringing Porgy and Bess to the Metropolitan Opera stage, which opened their 2019 season. Unprecedented, overwhelming demand required adding 3 additional performances during the run, a true rarity in opera. Please welcome James Robinson. Jim, good evening.
Hello, Andrew. Thank you so much. Thank you.
We're going to talk, but I'm first going to introduce also tonight the librettist and the composer of our opera, who are also going to come on screen when I finish their exciting introductions. First, the librettist, who is by day a neuroradiologist at Mount Sinai Medical Hospital in New York City and is in his 40th year of practice. Combining 2 extraordinary talents, he is also an accomplished national award-winning writer of novels and short stories. His latest novel, The Queen of Jerusalem, was just published this spring. His work has been praised by the Los Angeles Times, the New York Daily News, Time Out New York, and many others, which makes it no surprise that he now adds the title of librettist to his impressive list of literary distinctions. Awakenings is his first libretto, and I understand from his spouse, Tobias Picker, that it will not be his last. Which brings us also to our composer. He is one of the most important composers working in opera today. His operas have been commissioned by the Santa Fe Opera, the Los Angeles Opera, the Dallas Opera, the San Francisco Opera, and the Metropolitan Opera. Those works have gone on to be produced by the New York City Opera, San Diego Opera, the Opera in Montreal, Chicago Opera Theater, Covent Garden, and the Glimmerglass Festival, just to name a few. Many of you will recall his beautiful and heartbreaking Emmeline that was produced at Opera Theater in 2015. Last year, his fantastic Mr. Fox received a Grammy Award for Best Opera Recording. This newest opera, Awakenings, is his sixth, and we at Opera Theater are looking forward to producing it soon. Please welcome the librettist and composer of Awakenings, Aryeh Lev Stollman and Tobias Picker. Good evening, Aryeh and Tobias. Good evening. So first of all, for all of you, how are you and where are you tonight? Jim, you first. Where do we find you tonight?
Let's see. I am at home in Rancho Mirage, California, which is just outside of Palm Springs. And it's a very warm evening, but I understand that it's warmer in St. Louis right now. I think we're only at 91 degrees and it's about 15% humidity. So, but I do miss very much being in St. Louis with everybody.
We wish you were here. And Tobias and Aryeh, how about you? How are you both doing and where do we find you tonight? Oh, I think that Tobias and Aryeh were muted. Let's try that again.
Hello?
There we go. There we go.
Okay.
Good evening. We hear you
Now
perfectly. So
unmuted and alive and well on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, where it's also been a beautiful June day, and the eve of the Phase 1 reopening of New York City.
well, we are so glad to share it with you this evening. We're glad that you are unmuted and well and alive, but mostly that you are well and alive. Unmuted was a problem we solved quickly. Thanks for being here tonight. So let's get started by talking about this opera, which is a true story. And I'm not sure if all of our guests tonight will know that. So let's start. Aryeh, can you tell us a little bit about the real history of this opera and of the story and where this project came from, the real truth behind it?
So in 1916, from about 1916 to 1927, there was a pandemic like we have now that, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Of sleeping sickness. And it was a pandemic that was in all continents except, I guess, Antarctica. And the main symptom was this extreme lethargy that people had. Millions of people died. The number is not quite well known. And of those who survived, many thousands, after a certain time, it could be months or years, became Parkinsonian, meaning they became very stiff and they couldn't move. They became like statues, like people thought they were sleeping or not conscious. And they were warehoused in these huge institutions throughout the world until about the 1960s, when Dr. Sachs came to Beth Abraham Hospital in the Bronx, where there was a whole cohort of these patients who were in the back wards. And at that time, it was discovered that L-Dopa would help Parkinsonian patients, large doses, and he tried it on these encephalitis lethargica patients that people thought were asleep for 100, for decades. And they woke up, and so that's the Awakenings. But unfortunately, over time, many of them had very bad side effects. So they had to be taken off the medication and go back to that very sad state that they were in. And that's the arc of this story. How it came about, though, Tobias will tell you, his relationship with Dr. Sachs.
Well, so it's such a fascinating history, and I'm not sure many people know it. Let's jump to that. Tobias, you knew Dr. Oliver Sacks, is that right? Is that how this opera project came into being? And tell us about knowing this extraordinary scientist.
Yes, we were very good friends. We met in 1990. We were introduced by a mutual friend of Judith Rossner, who was the author of the novel version of Emmeline that the opera was based on, and of Oliver's, who was a Parkinsonian patient as well, and a furniture maker. This mutual friend, I should also add, coincidentally, was the model for Robert De Niro in the film Awakenings. Robert De Niro played the character of Leonard, and this mutual friend was followed around by De Niro for 3 weeks so that he could learn how he moved and how he froze, because he would go from a frozen state to a moving state, within a matter of seconds. So that's how we met. I wanted to meet Dr. Sachs, especially because of his interest in Tourette's syndrome, which I have as a neurological disorder, suffered from since early childhood. And we became very good friends, and over time he helped me to come to terms with my Tourette's.
That's so fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. So, Jim, you're always out curating the world, finding great stories for opera theater. How did this fascinating idea become an opera? And how did Tobias and you and Aryeh decide to commission this work?
Well, I had the great pleasure of directing Tobias's opera Dolores Claiborne for the San Francisco Opera a few years ago. And we had a wonderful time with that. And the librettist for that one is a man named J.D. McClatchy, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago. And we also took on Emmeline. We wanted to do a big revival of Emmeline, because I think it is one of the great masterworks in the American opera repertoire. And we had such a good time working on Emmeline, and Tobias is somebody I have tremendous respect for as a composer, and I love his work. I love the way he thinks. So we started to talk about a new project for Opera Theater St. Louis. We wanted to do a brand new opera, and we kicked around several ideas. And we were going down different routes, and nothing was really sticking. And around this time, Oliver Sacks was chronicling his last few days because he was suffering from terminal cancer. And in the New York Times, every so often, something would appear in the op-ed section about Oliver Sacks. And I was so moved by it. And I remember asking Tobias, I said, "Oh, Tobias, have you seen these pieces?" And he said, "Oh, well, I knew Oliver Sacks, because I think he had just passed away. And I have access or rights to his works for the stage, to adapt for the stage." And I thought, well, isn't there that amazing book, Awakenings? And Tobias said he'd always wanted to do that. And I thought it was a tremendously exciting idea for a variety of reasons. And then what was interesting was looking for somebody who could take on the libretto. And that's when Aryeh, whom I've known for so long as a friend, but also as a novelist. And the idea came up. Tobias said, "Hey, do you think we would want to take a chance with Aryeh doing his first libretto?" And I thought, sure, let's do it. And I'll, I'm not afraid of bringing newcomers to the creation of new operas. We've done a lot of that at Opera Theater St. Louis over the years. And what Aryeh had created in his first few scenes just had so much heart and drama. And we had a few back and forths, gave him some ideas about things. And very quickly, he fashioned what I thought was a really remarkable libretto. He also spoke to the subject with great authority, being a doctor, of course. But also there's incredible poetry in this libretto. And the other thing that I was really excited about was the story itself. You know, you think, oh my God, this is going to be such a grim story. And it was not a grim story. It's actually a very hopeful story. It's about love. It's about the passion of a doctor. It's the awakening of these patients. And we learn about their lives, and Dr. Sachs, in his way, has his own awakening. And I thought the way Aryeh captured it was really special. And then, of course, the way Tobias started to set it to music was really quite something. So I felt like we were really on to something.
That's so exciting. And I want to hear some of that music in a moment. But first, Jim, staying with you, before we hear some music, can you quickly give us a flavor of what this production might have looked like? I think you brought a few pictures of some of the set renderings and maybe a picture of the costume slides, just so that when we hear music, we have that in our minds. Can you give us a quick flavor of what this production would have looked like?
Sure. Let's look at some of the first images. So the production takes place in Beth Abraham Hospital. There was only one little departure from the hospital itself. But of course, this is my frequent collaborators, Alan Moyer, set designer, James Schutte, costumes, Chris Ackerl in lighting, Greg Emeta, projections. And we wanted this idea, this rather sterile clinical world. And there's a lot, people looking at patients. So there are these movable kind of windows. This is more of a sense of the real color of the space. And we wanted a space that could transform. It could be a day room. It could be a patient's room. It could be something else. And we like the spareness of it. And the hospital itself was a very spare, rather clinical environment. But through projection, it can enliven and become something else. This is just photographs of research from James Schutte, who's a brilliant researcher for costumes. But this is pretty much what it looked like at the time, and this is the look, and this is what we were going for. So, these are real people and real situations, and it was such a joy to unlock this piece and to figure out how we were going to put it on the stage. So we're really excited to be doing it in a future season.
Absolutely. With all of that amazing context and information, I want to move ahead and share our first excerpt from the opera. All but one of our selections tonight were recorded at a workshop that Opera Theater did at Opera Fusion. Opera Fusion is a new works incubator. It's a partnership between the Cincinnati Opera and the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. It's supported by the Mellon Foundation, and it's a really exciting place that supports some of the best emerging new works. So here in this ensemble, we'll hear the ensemble from that workshop singing from the very first part of Awakenings. Tobias, in just one or two sentences, can you set the stage for us for this music?
Yes, the opera opens with the chorus, the ensemble telling the story of Sleeping Beauty. Sleeping Beauty was referred to by Oliver in the book, and his patients he referred to as Sleeping Beauties. That Sleeping Beauty became a metaphor and an organizing principle of the opera. The music's held together by an ostinato, a series of octave A's, at A representing the name sax, and these ostinato octaves, repeated octaves in A, are to me represent rows upon rows of human statues. And as this story is told of Sleeping Beauty, Dr. Sachs makes his entrance, is introduced to the patients, and makes an oath to them to help them.
Beautiful. Here is When Slumber Fell Upon the Kingdom from Awakenings.
Just a few, they're like Parkinson's, only much worse, all hopeless. Encephalitis lethargica, millions died, but thousands lived to sleep. Long ago princes came to cross was a hedge of thorns protecting sleeping beauty. But all were caught in the thorns and killed. A century went by. A brave prince came who wished to see her. He was not afraid. The hedge of thorns with roses blossomed right before his eyes, and then it opened a path for him. So he passed through and found the princess and woke her with his kiss. Would that I were not afraid. I won't abandon
Beautiful music and a thrill to share it for the first time. I'm so pleased now to have our next guest join us, who you just heard in that excerpt. He is a native of New Jersey who holds degrees from the Eastman School of Music and a Master of Music from the San Francisco Conservatory. Opera News has praised him. He has sung in prestigious apprentice programs in Santa Fe and at Glimmerglass. And last year, he completed a 2-year appointment with Arizona Opera's Young Artist Program. This production was meant to be his professional debut. We are so excited to welcome tonight Jarrett Porter. Jarrett, good evening. First of all, where do we find you tonight, and how are you doing?
I am well. I am grateful to be healthy, and right now I'm in Burlington, Vermont, where I have some outside area to have no anxiety about being outside and spend some time exercising and stuff like that. So that's where I'm at right now.
Well, we're so glad to have you here with us over the magic of the internet. So, Jarrett, that was you, of course, singing in the workshop. How far along were you in preparing Dr. Sachs before you learned about our cancellation? Was this your first time performing a world premiere role? Tell us about the experience of working with the composer. Is it exciting? Is it overwhelming? Is it intimidating? What was that experience like?
Yeah, so, I had the great opportunity to do the very first workshop in St. Louis last March, which is the first time, I got to really delve into the piece, which was a unique process in itself, the very first time hearing everything and talking it over during breaks and such like that with Tobias and Aryeh and Jim, and discussing things like, what could be added, or does this need to be there or that. And so that was really wonderful to be privy to all those kind of conversations in March. And then, of course, in November with Opera Fusion, we got to do that workshop. So having those two really intensive times to look at the piece and to record, some excerpts really prepared me. By the end of, the Cincinnati workshop, I felt fairly memorized, which was unique, I think, for a new piece to be learned in that way. So when it came time to hearing about the cancellation, I was off book. I was ready to get going and experience what putting it on its feet would look like with everyone in the cast. But in terms of new music, it's funny that this would be my first professional opportunity, my first, big opera engagement because, ever since I was a freshman in college, I always loved new music. And I think it's because, as a freshman, you might not be put in the school opera because you're brand new, but in a college setting where there is a composition degree, of course, you have composers who are always looking for their work to be done or recorded in a practice room and stuff like that. So I always had a keen interest in working with composers on new music. So when Jim approached me about the possibility of doing Awakenings, of course, I was like overwhelmingly excited about that idea because it kind of was, a perfect beginning, or would be a perfect beginning to what I really want to do with my career, which is new music. And of course, the standard stuff, I love to sing Mozart and all of that, but there's something about premiering a role, which I never had the opportunity to do a role premiere. But of course, I've had the opportunity to work with composers and do some chamber music and stuff like that.
Well, this is just a hiatus, and it's so great to have you with us and to hear you sing this role that we hope to hear you sing on our stage soon. So, Tobias,
Oh, yes.
Awakenings is now on a hiatus for a little while. Is it tempting for you to go back and want to tweak it? I'm sure even my saying that will send Jim's hair on end. Or have you put your pen down, and is the work now in the same place that it will be when we get back to it in a future season?
Well, really, our focus right now is on our new opera, The Danish Girl, which we're writing for Lucia Lucas, and to be premiered hopefully in 23 in Europe. And so once I delivered Awakenings, I felt I let go of it after all of the workshops, all of the work, all of the years of thinking about it, and left like a child, left it to the world. But you never know. Maybe before the premiere, I'll open the score and think, why did I do that? And change it. And no, I try not to do that. But in rehearsal, I would say, no matter how much you workshop an opera, there's always going to be something that you find to tweak and to improve. So I'm looking to that period to do the last revisions.
Got it. So, Jim, at Opera Theater, you've had a tremendous track record of commissioning new works that are really resonant, true stories. What kind of operas are you looking for? What sets your radar off that something's going to be the right new topic? And what tells you it's going to be successful? Is it the subject matter, or is it the matter of getting all of the right people on the team, librettist, composer, the creative team? What's that alchemy that makes a successful new work?
It's a lot of different things, Andrew. And I think one thing that we've always done at Opera Theater of St. Louis, definitely since the time that I've been artistic director, but even prior to that, Colin Graham, who was our late, great artistic director, had his hands in new works a lot. And Opera Theater has always done this. So it is definitely in the DNA of the company. Personally, I like to do operas that resonate somehow with where the world is, what's going on, whatever that happens to be. Sometimes I use this term. I'm more interested in the new opera as opposed to the new old opera. So I always get this confused whether I'm making sense. It's like new wine in old bottles or old wine in new bottles. And I think I can't quite figure out what that was, but I'm just going to say I like the idea of subjects that are resonant, and also bringing people in to write things. Sometimes the more challenging the subject, the more difficult the task, the greater the success. And I think it's just because at opera theater we have it's built into what we do that it's an all hands on deck operation, and we like to set things up for success. No matter how crazy the idea is, no matter how challenging it is, I feel like everybody from the staff to the board, the community. I mean, everybody is invested in the success of a new piece. And that is very rare. I mean, I've been involved in world premieres at other companies where sometimes it's like, okay, there you go, make it work. And I think that new pieces do require a little more hands-on, a little more finessing, and I've been very, very excited by the fact that our audiences, our community in St. Louis are just so passionate about doing new works.
We're so fortunate to have a community that embraces new work and embraces risk taking. But I also have to say your track record has been just about as good, I think, as anybody anywhere. So thank you for helping us to continue curating these works. Aryeh, I have to ask, the combination of physician and opera librettist, you may not be the only one, but I think you're the only one that I know of. These are two very distinct worlds. Tell us about how they intersect. Tell us about how that is for you. And I would guess that your medical reports must be some of the most beautifully penned documents at Mount Sinai.
Well, first of all, I hope my reports are correct, most of all, without too many mistakes. Good diagnoses, correct diagnoses. But I think both medicine, I think this goes for writing, opera, and medicine, they're very life-affirming endeavors. They nourish each other for me. I don't really see them as so separate. When you're a doctor, you encounter life very concentrated, intense. You learn about people in 5 minutes what they probably never told somebody in their family, ever. So it's an intensity and an emotional intensity, and I think opera does the same thing, shows us life in an intense form. I think it does that for me. So they nourish each other, and they're very much like each other.
Well, it's an amazing.
Might not seem like that at the first glance, but I think it's true.
It's an amazing perspective. Thank you for sharing that. I have to ask, tell us a little bit about life at Mount Sinai recently. You've been at the epicenter of this pandemic.
Right. So we had an enormous amount of patients that came through. At one point, we had 2,000 COVID patients in our hospital system at one time throughout our system, throughout the city. And now we're down to, I think, about 200. But what was really wonderful, I mean, it was terrible, but I think the teamwork at Sinai saved thousands of lives. And our nurses, our doctors, our technologists, our health aides, our transporters, everybody really worked hard and bravely, and they did a wonderful job. So
we are
emotional.
all so deeply. No, I can only imagine. We are all so grateful to all of the frontline and healthcare workers who have been battling this. And so on behalf of all of us, to you, I say a particular thanks.
Thank you.
I'm going to change gears significantly, Aryeh, but I'm going to stay with you. We're now going to move on to hear our next musical selection, which is also from the Opera Fusion workshop. This time featuring Matthew DiBattista as Leonard, Adrian Danrich as Miriam, and our very own Jarrett Porter as Dr. Sachs. Aryeh, may I call on you to give us a few words of introduction to this aria, which is called Tragic and Heroic Are the Cycads?
So when the patients began to wake up, And Dr. Sachs brought them to the Botanical Gardens. And the Botanical Gardens, you might not know, are right across the street from Beth Abraham Hospital. But they had never been there, or as far as I know. And he brought them, and he says they're like blossoming flowers. And to him, it's paradise. He loved plants, and he said, you're all like flowers. So he tells them what kind of flowers they are. And they ask him, what kind of flower are you, Dr. Sachs? And he says, I'm more like a plant than a flower. And then he talks about the cycads, and just a little background on them, we'll hear it. Cycads have a lineage of about 300 million years. They're older than palm trees. They're older than flowering plants. And they're survivors. They survived 5 major extinctions. So he says he loves the cycads, and he says they're heroic for surviving, tragic because of what they've lost, their friends. And in the end, Miriam says, I hope it's in this, is then we're like cycads too. Tragic,
well,
but once tragic, but now joyous now. So she changes the words, and it's very
what a beautiful introduction.
What? Thank you.
I said it's a beautiful introduction. Let's hear the music. Thank you.
The cycad encephalatus longifolius. Look at its fronds arranged in rosettes, its sturdy trunk.
It looks like a stunted palm tree.
They look like palms, but are much older. In Jurassic times they grew 100 feet. They have no flowers, only palms filled with colorful seeds.
But what is so special about the cycads?
Tragic and heroic are the cycads, emissaries from deepest time, a time we cannot imagine. Tragic and heroic are the cycads, tragic. The world that bore them is lost, its inhabitants have vanished, heroic to surviving extinction, to live and grow in our time.
Then we're like cycads too, once tragic, but joyous.
Beautiful, and so special to hear it with that wonderful context of that introduction. So, Tobias, we asked Jim a little bit about what makes a successful opera. I want to ask you, what makes a successful opera? What role does truth in the story play? And for example, why do you think the tragic but true story of Emmeline has resonated so well with audiences and critics?
Well, to answer the first part of your question first, I think there's a great deal of appeal in true stories, but true story is not necessarily a good story for an opera, and a good story is not necessarily a true story. But it's a mystery what makes an opera successful. It's some kind of alchemy that takes place. But I've written 6 operas, and 4 of them are based on true stories. 2 of them are fiction. So I think that actually Emmeline and Awakenings have the most in common with each other, because they really, except for Fantastic Mr. Fox, which is in another category as a family opera, these 2 operas present central character, and Emmeline just really one, mainly, but in awakening several central characters who are sympathetic and who are not twisted and dysfunctional and murderous and suicidal and typically verismo operatic characters. So Emmeline is different in that way because she chooses life. She could have killed herself, but she chooses life because she represents the strength of the American woman. And I think there's a lot of speculation as to why Emmeline registers so powerfully with people, but I think it has something to do with the inherent drama and love that takes place between mothers and sons, and every son innocent has a mother really, and every mother has a son, even if something didn't actually happen that way. It's kind of everyone is encapsulated in that relationship to me, and I think that has something to do with its success. But I could be completely wrong. I really don't know why it is, but I also think it has to do though with the audience being able to be sympathetic to the characters and not think, boy, what a screwed up, mess of a character. Dolores Claiborne, she was a great character, but she murdered her husband after all, and she did it for a good cause. But still, it's hard to identify with murderers for something holds us back, and so those barriers are gone from Emmeline, and they're gone from Awakenings.
That makes so much sense. Jim, what do you think is the secret for a work to make it not just for a successful premiere, but to really enter the repertory and to get past that initial blush of success?
Well, it's really tricky. You never know when things are going to be picked up and when people are going to take them. But I think more and more, I'm finding that true stories do resonate with people, things that people can identify with. I think there's something about that we all find appealing. I would say, though, the one thing that always makes a good opera is a good libretto, and you need a good story and a good libretto. And frequently, people ask me, "What makes a good libretto?" And I was asked by the wonderful playwright Rajiv Joseph, who did the libretto for Shalimar the Clown. He'd never done a libretto before, but he's a wonderful playwright. And taking a Salman Rushdie novel and distilling that into something, an evening length piece, is no mean feat. And he said, "Well, how do I start? What do I do with a libretto? How do I start?" And I said, the purpose of a libretto is to give something to the composer that will inspire him to write the music, that the music is absolutely essential. And think of it this way: get rid of adjectives and adverbs and let the composer do that. So there's something about starting with a libretto that really inspires music, because the music is the principal storyteller there. And I think having been through so many different types of new pieces, I always find that the most successful librettos and most successful operas in general are those where the music is absolutely essential, because so often in new operas, librettists write way too many words, and the composer sometimes is left just musicalizing text. And the music really has to be much more important than that, and that's what makes great opera. It's interesting what Tobias said about characters. You can have unsavory characters be very sympathetic. Rigoletto is a great example of that. I'd say Sweeney Todd. There is another side to the unpleasantness of these people. But I think I'm happy to hear Tobias talk about Emmeline and Awakenings in the same way, because I think these people are kind of quietly heroic, and even though they're in very unusual and quite different circumstances, there's something that we can really relate to, and I think that's what's really brave about taking on these subjects in Tobias's operas.
That's fascinating. The interplay between librettist and composer, and the strength of the opera resting on the libretto. It probably helped in this case to have your spouse as a collaborator, to be able to work back and forth so quickly, Tobias and Aryeh. I am curious about that. But we should now move on to hear our next.
Though, the success of an opera does have something to do with the music, too.
Well, yes.
Well, I think I think we all know that, and I think we know that the music is absolutely crucial. But it's interesting to hear about the interplay between the two. It's a very fascinating idea to me, which is one that I'm not sure is as evident to our audiences. I want to share, though, another very beautiful musical selection with all of you. This one was recorded from his home by the wonderful tenor David Portillo, who would have been in this cast with the pianist Yasuko Ura. Jim, in a few words, would you introduce I Am a Quiet Flower?
Sure. This is a continuation of the scene in the botanical gardens with Sax and Nurse Rodriguez and the patients. And Sax has asked everybody who they think they are, a flower, what type of flower they might be. And Rodriguez is talking about his past, growing up as a young man in Puerto Rico. And this is an absolutely beautiful aria rendered by David, who is an extraordinary tenor that we've been able to have in St. Louis a couple of times in recent years. So we will be looking forward to hearing him do this role very soon.
Wonderful. Enjoy.
That no one
That is so beautiful. And Tobias, I think that affirms that the beauty of the music certainly has something to do with the success of an opera. Jarrett, you were recently quoted in Opera News saying, it's a lengthy quote, but I want to read it. You said, at the beginning of this pandemic, and knowing the likelihood of the cancellation of Awakenings, my first thought was that when we get to come back to the stage, it will be with a fervor that will be unmatched. We will have a renewed dedication to each other as artists, to tell stories together, to sing beautiful words, to hear the visceral sound of a live orchestra below our feet. The gift of being able to be together in this way, to tell these stories, what a wonderful responsibility to have. I was so moved reading that quote. And I wonder, a couple months into this very difficult time, do you still feel that way? And how do you think audiences will respond when we can come back together?
Oh, absolutely. I definitely feel that way. And I really mean what I said in that quote, that F. Paul Driscoll was so lovely to reach out to me and talk to me about everything and update what my soundbite would be. But, I've always noticed of course, I'm very young in the business and that has its perks. And one thing that I've really noticed is that with what I think from the outside must look like a really interesting lifestyle, right? Being in many cities and during a period of a year and going off and being in this city one day and then starting rehearsals in a different city the next with a different group of people. I've always felt like it's very easy to build up walls in those situations. And I feel like with a pandemic like this, it's kind of grounded me in a way to sit back and say, when we get to come back to this, it's like we're all going to feel amazing, I think, at the opportunity to be able to communicate a story like this. I was on the phone a few months ago when the opera was initially canceled for the summer with Tobias. I think he said, who would have thought an opera about a pandemic canceled by a pandemic? And it's something that I really think I've been mostly thinking about is that when we do get to return, I think audiences will react in a more immediate way. I don't know necessarily what that means, but it just seems like this, in an odd sort of way, has brought us all closer together, because I think we now know how much we really do need all of this in our lives. Of course, me being an opera singer, I need it in my life for my livelihood and for feeding my own passion. But in terms of telling stories, I think there seems to be what I hope will be a more immediate response, not just walking into a theater and sitting down and watching an opera. It's going to be much more communal in a way. After coming out of something like this, it's the big topic to talk about when we all return. So that's been really what's been on my mind and what kind of fueled saying that.
Certainly, thank you for sharing that. Of course, in just the last week, our country has been dealt another very, very terrible blow. Layered on top of the pandemic is the tragic death of George Floyd, which has inspired debate over America's chronic and continuing condition of racism, and a lot of discussion about how historically white and privileged organizations can be better allies. What can be the response of white artists in this situation? Jim, I want to start with you. How can we be allies in this situation?
Well, I have to say that I've been talking to a lot of people this week about this and doing a lot of Zoom calls and talking to colleagues all over the place about this. Part of it is because having had an experience directing Porgy and Bess recently, and also having done 2 world premieres by Terence Blanchard. two very important pieces that we did at Opera Theater of St. Louis. And I said, I don't know what else we can do but keep doing what we're doing and do more of it. That this is, for me, having, just as an example, Terrence Blanchard doing these two operas for us. He'd never done them before. These are very unique subjects. And just say, look, welcome to our home. We want you to create something for us. And we want the people in the audience to look like the people on the stage, and we want the people on the stage and in the audience to look like our community. And I think we just have to keep doing that. And that to me feels very normal. And it seems like a no-brainer. But unfortunately, maybe we just don't, as a society, try hard enough to do that. And I think that there is something about this inclusion, bringing people into your home. I remember when I first started rehearsals at the Met for Porgy and Bess, which was one of the great experiences I ever had, and how welcoming that extraordinary cast of 95 people was, featuring some amazing artists like Eric Owens and Angel Blue and Denise Graves and all those people. And I said, look, we're also thrilled to be doing this piece. Yes, we understand the problems with it, but look, I feel like I am a guest in your home, and I'm going to be asking everybody a lot of questions. And I was very thrilled to see those extraordinary artists doing that piece. And I'm very happy with how something like Fire Shut Up in My Bones was received, how Champion continues to be received. But we just have to do more of it. It has to seem completely normal, and telling everybody's story is so important. And I think that's the way to do it. I don't know whether that's a sufficient answer, Andrew, but I feel like that is part of
I'm not sure any of us has a sufficient answer. I think we're all learning and having a crucially important dialogue. Tobias, what are your thoughts about this question?
Well, I want to second everything that Jim said, and what Jim has accomplished with these last two commissions he spoke of, and Porgy is well, everything Jim said I second, but and my answer is really shorter. I would like to quote our former president, Barack Obama. The answer for me is vote.
That's a powerful statement, and I think it's a point well made. Keeping this theme close at hand, but asking a slightly broader question, and Aryeh, we'll start with you. What is the power and the responsibility of art and artists to bring people together and to increase empathy?
It's a great question. How it works, I don't know. To me, it's a mystery, but it works in letting us enter into other people, into their souls and into their emotions. I mean, art, music, writing, medicine, helps us. But we have to also be open to it. We have to be aware. We have to be able to learn new things we didn't know about other people. But I think all those things help us do that. But there has to be something in us that makes us open to it and to learn from it and to accept it. And in addition to voting, I actually think the First Amendment of the Constitution is also very important, and it precedes the Second Amendment in its importance and number, and that is the right for peaceable assembly. And I think it's kind of amazing to see that happening throughout the country. So.
It certainly is. Jarrett, do you have any thoughts about this question about the possibility and the power of art to bring people together and to increase empathy?
Well, it just makes me think about what Tobias and Jim were talking about earlier in this talk, is that, you know, what makes Awakenings and the opera Emmeline so approachable is how sympathetic those characters are. And they're not, you know, as dramatic as the Verismo characters in Puccini or Verdi or things like that. I think, you know, perhaps now is the time in which we heavily focus on being able to see oneself in a person on stage, which I think is sometimes difficult to do, frankly, as an opera singer. I can't think off of the top of my head how many times out of 10 I can actually picture myself as that person. You know, I think specifically in opera, I hope it'll be about focusing on real stories and true stories. You know, going off of an earlier topic, we're in a pandemic right now, and I really hope that, you know, that fuels new opera. I don't see how it can't, especially, you know, dealing with all of the social injustice and racism in our country during this time on top of that. So I think to tell these stories that we're experiencing right now soon would be very impactful.
That's an important thought. And I'm certain that Jim Robinson will be bringing us stories of this time just as soon as we can get back to commissioning. This is such an important conversation. And Jim, I applaud the work that Opera Theater and you have done. I think we're all learning, and there's more that all of us can be doing. But it's an important conversation for us to be starting. We could keep chatting all evening, and there are so many questions I didn't even get to ask because you're all so thoughtful, and I love hearing from all of you. But I want to turn to some of the questions from our audience. We had some really great questions tonight. And a question actually tonight, Tobias, for you from Kate Edgar, who is the executive director of the Oliver Sacks Foundation. Kate asks, Tobias, I know it took 20 years or so to develop this opera. How has your conception of the story changed since we first started talking about this idea?
Wow. Hi, Kate. Thanks for that question. That's really a good question. I really learned everything about Awakenings. I didn't know, I did actually write a ballet based on Awakenings, as Kate, as you know, that was done in the UK. Completely different score, completely different ideas, and that helped me to get to understand the characters and the situations. But writing this opera with Aryeh together with him, and we really did write it together in a way that is unprecedented in my compositional experience. I learned about medicine from him, the medicine of the neurology of these people, and I would say that the overarching evolution of my sense of what this story is about went from being this fascinating, phenomenal tale of the survivors of a pandemic that's been forgotten and the survivors who'd been forgotten, to being really a story about love and the power of love to change. And I think that's very much, that was Oliver, and that was very much, I think that's what Oliver may have meant by writing this book.
That's fascinating. Thank you. A question, I think, to build on that, because as you say, you and Aryeh did write this work together, and the casting happened as the work was being completed. How does the casting impact the libretto, impact the music? What is the uh, sort of relationship between all those elements working together as the piece comes together? Aryeh, I'll start with you. As some of the casting became known, did that change any of the words for you?
I'm not sure it changed any of the words, but since this was a very dynamic process, I would write a scene or two, and then Tobias would write the music while I was writing the next scene. And speaking of, which comes first, the words or the music, whenever I would go to his studio and he wrote the music for a scene I just wrote, and it's again a mystery. I don't know. It seemed this is the music for it. It's amazing. It inspired me to write the next scene. It seemed like this was heaven sent. This music was just right. It inspired me. It gave me courage because it's a little intimidating writing a libretto the first time for a great composer, a great director, a great opera company. It's a little scary. But what happens was there are a lot of different auditions over the time, and before the opera was completed, and hearing people actually sing your words with Tobias's music was very inspiring, whether they were people that were chosen or not. But for me, a neuroradiologist, to hear my words sung by anybody was pretty amazing. But I don't know if that changed the libretto. It was just inspired. It gave courage and inspiration. So
it's an honor for us to have your words on our stage. Tobias, same question to you. Does the casting change how you're writing the music?
Well, when Joyce L. Corey, who played Emmeline in St. Louis, agreed to create the character of Rose in Awakenings, I knew that I could float a high C forever at the end of Act 1, so that she could do it. I knew she could do that, and so yes, I mean, when I know who I'm writing for, and I've written for them or they've sung my work before, I know very, very well what they can do, and it does influence what I ask them to do. And there's sometimes they're surprised that I ask them to do these acrobatic things that they might have rather I hadn't. But it does, knowing who you're writing for does make a difference. And working with Jarrett in the workshops was a real privilege, as I've never gotten to do that before, to work with the principal character singer. And so there were lots of revisions made in the music that I learned to make from the way Jarrett approached the score. And so it was having workshops with real live singers affected the way I revised the music. And knowing who I was writing for, definitely every part is tailored to their voices.
That's fascinating. We are short of time, but I'm going to get in one more question because we've had a question from our audience, which is one of the questions actually, or very similar to one of the questions that I did not have time to ask all of you during our discussion. So we'll do a lightning round, and I'll ask for a brief answer from each of you. During these opening night discussions, we've been asking artists how they are caring for their artistic selves during this time. Are you inspired to create? Are you not inspired to create? What are you wanting to create next when we can get back to work? I'm eager to have a quick answer from all of you. Jim, I'll start with you.
Well, I am doing a ton of reading and a ton of talking to creators about what they want to do, and to hear different ideas about what they think the next thing is. And I think that something that I've been thinking a lot about and reading a lot about is it's the absence of something. And what does that mean? What's that old, you don't know what you got until you lose it, to kind of what Jarrett was talking about. And really thinking about, it's the absence of not being able to get together and create, not to be able to sit in an audience with several, 100 people, not to have that shared experience. And I think that is going to positively inform everything we do moving forward.
Thank you for that. Thank you. You're also making bread, I think.
I tried the sourdough thing because everybody was meant to do that. It was, and so I did it, and it was a monumental failure. So I started hoarding yeast and did bread the old-fashioned way, and then I learned how to make and can marmalade because we have a ton of citrus trees in the backyard. So that is mission accomplished. Okay.
All right. Aryeh, how are you caring for your inner artist, or are you too busy being at the forefront of global pandemic?
Well, we're fortunate that we had a project that preceded this pandemic, the Danish Girl. So at least we're starting on that. But it's a very distracting time. But we have something to focus on. Hopefully this summer we'll delve into it more.
Okay. Tobias, you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, composing, I haven't stopped composing, but I've gotten very involved with my opera company. I'm artistic director, as you know, of the Tulsa Opera, which is co-producing Awakenings with Opera Theater St. Louis. So I've been working on a project called Staying Alive, where we're presenting all the singers that have appeared with us in the last 4 or 5 seasons, and the ones that were to appear with us in the spring and next season, who will hopefully appear in specially made content for us that we put out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So that's been curating that. It's been keeping me very busy.
Well, and I've seen some of it. It's really exciting what you're doing. Jarrett, we'll give you the quick last word. How are you caring for your inner artist at a time when you can't make the music that we want to hear you make?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, want a break from the news or don't want to pick up the New York Times because, we pick up something new every day and it's either good or bad news, and it's usually bad news these days. But for me, I think I just feel more urgency to be more informed, and being more informed about what's going on in the world feeds me as an artist, because I feel like, there are so many stories to tell and so many things to relate to one thing, and Awakenings can relate to this story and such and so on. So that's kind of what has been feeding me. I've been taking time to listen to a ton of classical music and art song, which I feel like I'm hugely passionate about, but don't have time to really do. So that's my simple answer in terms of what I've been up to artistically.
I know it's unfair to ask each of you actually for a quick answer to what might be a very deep question. But thank you all. Thank you for such a wonderful discussion this evening. Thank you for sharing your artistry and for helping us to create this work, which we can't wait to bring to our stage. I want to thank also the members of my staff, my colleagues, especially Nicole Freber on lay, Damon Bristow, and their teams. And I want to thank all of you in the audience for joining us tonight and for so many other events throughout our festival, our digital festival. We have one more opening night spotlight next Saturday at 7 p.m. Opening night featuring Susanna with Patricia Rissette and Gemma New. And additional information for our digital festival can be found at experienceopera.org/thisisOTSL. I'm going to ask our artists to stick around, our panelists to stick around, but first we're going to hear one more very beautiful piece of music from Awakenings. This is featuring Teresa Perrotta as Rose and Adrian Danrich as Miriam. This is If Time Stood Still for Us. Please enjoy.
We've been awakened, but not completely. My dreams are more real to me than whatever happened to me. Something awful may be coming for me, but right now let me be. Don't you see? I'm happy for you. I am happy for you. Rose, I admit it, I dreamed too. If time stood still for us, what of it? What is time to us now? Let us be, we are happy now. Despite this fearsome life bestowed on us, we've been awakened but not completely. What else can we do? And if we choose to live inside our dreams, when our bodies seem apart from us, what of it? Let us
Very beautiful. Thank you so much, Tobias and Aryeh, for giving us that incredible music and those beautiful and very timely words. Thank you for joining us tonight. We'll end, as we always do, in the great tradition of opera theater. Everyone, please join me in raising a glass. Tonight, we drink to new work, which offers us the prospect of new possibility. We drink to your health. We drink to justice. We drink to peace. And we drink to looking forward to being together again just as soon as we can be. Cheers. Thank you all, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you.